You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. You wanted it, you got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Whether you want to learn how to protect your portfolio, generate income, or even become a master of volatility, the Options Bootcamp drill instructors will break it all down for you. Now, let's get you into peak options trading shape. Here are your Options Bootcamp drill instructors.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time to kick off a new year here in Options Bootcamp. Man, the show that just keeps on going, keeps on chugging. You folks show no end to your appetite for all things Options Bootcamp. More popular at the end of 2021 than it has ever been. And more popular. It's crazy. It's just the love for the show continues to grow. We love you all out there, for everyone who joined us. We know a lot of you came within the last year, the last 2 years, certainly, since the start of the pandemic. It has been interesting to see just the wave, the reawakening of interest in all things Options Bootcamp. I've been looking at the numbers. It's that time of year where we're crunching the top episodes of the year, and we get to see what you folks are really sinking your teeth into, including we have some for today. Our special top 10 extravaganza for Options Bootcamp. And before you say to yourself, why are you doing a top 10? Let me just say, I'm looking at the numbers, and you folks really like this kind of thing. Give you a hint for one of the episodes that may or may not be on the list. And you know who's always on the list? It's Mr. Dan Passarelli, the founder of Market Taker Mentoring and the author of 1 or 2 or perhaps 47, I lost count, options-oriented tomes. Mr. P, welcome back to the program. How goes your new year, sir?
Well, hello, Mr. Longo. It's going pretty good so far. You know, we're just 5 days into it, so what could have gone wrong in that period of time?
Well, this time last year, if you waited maybe one more day, then you would certainly rue those words. And the year before, didn't we assassinate that Iranian general on the tarmac right around this time as well? So beginning of January, things can pop off when you least expect it. So yeah, on the plus side, though, we've had some good days in the market. I mean, if you're into EVs or Ford, I mean, Tesla and Ford had their year already. They're done. You could sell them and go home, and you're good for the year in both of those names. So I guess it depends where you hang out in the markets, what kind of year you're having. Hopefully, it's a good one. Let's keep the holiday spirit alive here on the network, having fun. Kick off the new year in style. And to do just that, let's first kick off the new year by looking back at what you folks loved. What were your top 10 most popular episodes of Options Bootcamp from the year of madness that was 2021? All right, Mr. Dan, are you ready to do this thing, sir?
I am, yes. Let's do it.
Before we dive into the list, do you have any guesses? I mean, it's hard to guess particular episodes because we do so many. 50 odd. I'm not sure if we did exactly 52 last year. Probably took a week or two off here or there. But in general, we did 50 odd episodes probably last year. So it's hard to guess precisely. But if you have any general guesses as to what you think made the list in terms of maybe subject matter or perhaps time frame when the episodes came out, lay it on us, sir.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'll tell you what, we talked about a lot of darn good stuff last year. So it's even hard to wager a guess.
I was just refreshing myself looking at the list of all the different things we talked about last year. If you just listened to Options Bootcamp last year and you did naught else, I dare say you're looking pretty good. Our top 10 episodes for 2021. I will say this, 9 of them were from last year. Usually it's the more recent episodes are going to be topping the list in any given year, but for some reason, and I think you can guess why, one of them from the primordial ooze days of this show did make it onto the top 10 list. Pretty high, actually, for last year. Let's get to it. Number 10, Mr. Dan. Number 10 on our top 10 list episodes, your favorites of 2021. Options Bootcamp 125, Risk Reversals versus Strangles, and you also talked about combining the Greeks, so merging your delta with your gamma, with your theta and your vega. That came out on March 3rd of this year, Mr. Dan. I bet you had that in your top 10 bingo card, sir.
Wow, no, I did not have that one. I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure I can remember that one, but I'm sure it was great.
Well, you are still hungover from the new year, so we will give you that pass, sir. All right, let's go on to number 9. Number 9 is a fun one, and again, one of the reasons why you hear these top 10s on the network, because you folks love them. Because the number 9 episode for last year, Dan, was our Options Bootcamp top 5 episode countdown for the year that was 2020. That came out late last year. It came out on January 20th of last year. So there you go, Dan. Folks like themselves a good top countdown, sir. Did you ever imagine that our top 5 episodes from 2020 would make it onto the list for 2021, sir?
You know what? No, I honestly did not, I have to say.
Apparently folks like themselves a good top episode countdown. So we'll have some more for you this week, listeners. Let's move on to number 8. I will say there are a couple of general themes that leap out to me from this list. One is a lot of them came in the madness, the maelstrom that was shall we say, the meme stock frenzy. Really the 1.0 version of. We saw multiple iterations of the meme stock, but a lot of the episodes that we put out during that initial frenzy, that initial foray of the meme stocks, they were very popular. They remained very popular throughout the entirety of the year. Folks tended to flock to those. So we did see some interesting clustering around those areas, like number 8, our number 8 episode for last year, Options Bootcamp 123, which is your GameStop thoughts, plus overnight options mystery. So this was right as GameStop frenzy was hitting its heights. This was on February 17th, so actually maybe a week or so after some of the crazy madness had really started breaking out there. And we wanted to spend some time on the show just kind of giving you our thoughts, our perspective, because this was unlike anything we had really ever seen before in terms of just the sheer frenzied madness of it. Mr. Dan, now that we can look back on it with nearly a year behind us here, what are your thoughts that our GameStop thoughts made it all the way to the number 8 spot on the countdown, sir?
I know. How about us? If you were here, Mark, I would totally pat you on the shoulder and turn around so that you could pat me on the shoulder.
Yes, a little bit of back patting is always good. Of course, verboten also in the COVID era. So interesting stuff. As we move on to number 7, listeners. Number 7, Options Bootcamp 124, came out a week later. So that was a hot time frame for a lot of people. And we talked about surprise puts. A lot of you were having issues, questions, concerns about puts, how they worked, why you were maybe seeing assignments on certain ones that you didn't expect, or vice versa, how expiration and settlement worked. So we did a whole episode about that called Those Pesky Puts back on February 24th of last year. Mr. Dan, can you even remember back to those heady days, sir, where puts were all the rage?
Vaguely, yeah, very, very vaguely. I mean, we kind of flirted with that a couple weeks ago, but certainly not all the rage as they were back in the good old days. Should we call them the good old days?
I don't know. Were they that good? They were crazy old days, that's for sure. And in some sense, they are still with us, so they're not really that old. But intriguing stuff nonetheless. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I said number 8 was our GameStop thoughts. That was actually your responses to our episode called the GameStop Aftermath, which is our number 6 spot on our top 10, episode 121, that makes more sense. February 3rd, that date lines up a little bit better because GameStop obviously started popping off in mid-January. So the GameStop Aftermath episode that we did on February 3rd was number 6. A lot of you had questions, and again, we wanted to give our thoughts on all things GameStop. And then episode 8, we answered your questions and fielded all your responses, of which were many, about all things GameStop out there as well. So yeah, GameStop, not surprisingly, Dan, GameStop featured prominently in our top 10 for this past year. So.
Yeah, I mean, that one's got to be on everybody's top 10, right?
When you write your case study of 2021, will it feature prominently, sir?
Indeed.
Is that the next thing you got cooking up with your publisher, the Dan Passarelli case study of 2021 from the Harvard Business School?
Oh man, I've been toying with wanting to write a book, but haven't quite gotten around to it.
You're too busy becoming a rental real estate magnate, sir. A baron, if you will, over there in the far shores of Lake Michigan, where Dan is beaming to us from right now, his latest acquisition in his real estate empire. So if the connection is wonky, that's why. He's out in the far hinterlands. All right, now we're into the top 5, listeners. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes here. Surprisingly, GameStop didn't make it into the top 5, which is interesting. Number 5, Options Bootcamp 122, so right between those other episodes. Dan, you'll like this. It's right up your alley. It's the Mysteries of Theta, Delisted Options, Bitcoin, and more from February 10th of last year. I know you like yourself a little bit of the Greek, sir. Are you happy to see that at least Theta making it into the top 5, sir?
Now, this episode I remember fondly. That was a really, really great one. What number was that?
That was episode 122 from February 10th. Yeah,
that was a really good one, man.
Dan gets excited when we talk the Greek, so he remembers those. The rest of them, just all a blur. But this one, that one he resonates with them. Number 4, again, a little bit later in the time frame, outside of the immediate window that was the Meme Stock Madness. This is episode 130, which came out on April 7th of last year. And this was our best positions and strategies for new options traders. We knew, of course, a lot of new people were hitting the market. And so we thought for the newcomers out there, probably need a little bit of a primer, as they say, on maybe how to get started with some positions and strategies. So we broke down a lot of the goodies on that episode. Mr. Dan, a well-timed episode last year, breaking down the best positions and strategies for new options traders last year, sir.
Yeah, that's right. That was, that was a really good one too, because, we tend to talk about things, I don't know, I mean, we kind of run the full gamut from, great things for new entrants into trading, as well as some pretty advanced topics also. But yeah, I think it's really important to do some of those, what strategies are practical and useful for newer traders. Because when people are first starting out, it can feel really overwhelming. You have all these different strategies that you hear people talk about, that you read about, and, it can just make your head spin. So you need a good place to start. So yeah, I remember doing that, and I was really, really happy about that episode.
Number 3 kind of surprised me. It was Options Bootcamp 119. It came out on January 13th of last year, and it was kind of in the middle of our looking back on 2020 series of episodes. And this one was Options Lessons Learned in 2020. That episode really resonated clearly with a lot of you. Number 3 on our top 10 for an extremely busy year last year on Options Bootcamp. So that really says something. That surprised me, that the lessons learned from 2020, many of them are apt and apply now in 2021. We were dealing with some of the same scenarios this time last year that we are right now, coming on the heels of a record year for options. We saw a legion of unprecedented things happening in the market. We saw volatility spike in 2020 and then kind of come off. This year has been mostly coming off, even though in January of last year it did spike again up to about 37 before it began its long, slow death spiral throughout the rest of the year. So there were some similarities. Obviously, there are no similarities really to the meme stock phenomenon. That was new, and that was about to kick off right as we recorded that episode. So intriguing stuff. Dan, people really liked their top episodes and lesson learned from 2020, taking 2 spots in our top 10 last year.
That's a really good one too, because we all like to, like you learn things watching the show. You make a really good trade. You made money and you build confidence. But just taking a step back, like after every single trade or at the end of every week or whatever it is, and just getting those lessons down, like just making sure that you learn not just from your wins but from your losers, like that is the kind of stuff that makes you a great trader. It's just so darn important.
That, and of course listening to a show like this, are the two key essential elements to becoming a great trader. Dan, number 2 was also an interesting one for me here on our list. I said pretty much all of them are episodes from last year except for one, and it is this one coming all the way in at the number 2 spot. Dan, do you want to hazard a guess what other episode we did outside of last year could possibly be at the number 2 overall spot, sir?
I have no idea, man. I can't even make a guess.
I'll give you a hint. We had a lot of new listeners last year and the year before who are brand spanking new to options.
Was it something to do with Robinhood?
Maybe think earlier in the show's history. Perhaps, dare I say it, its beginning.
I don't know, man.
Maybe you started episode 1. That's where we began. Because that's what was number 2 on the list for last year. Our number 1, our initial episode, listeners, the episode that kicked it all off, episode 1 of Options Bootcamp, called, appropriately enough, Options Basics. Dan, it came out in March 26th of 2012.
Oh, that far back?
Yes, people were digging into the archives this year. So coming up this January, Dan, is the 15th anniversary of our network. So we're probably going to do some fun stuff for that. But it's also in March. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of this show. Isn't that crazy?
Holy, it has not been 10 years. No way.
It flies by, sir. When you're talking to me, things just tend to be fun and fly by. What can I say? So yes, folks did some digging, because it actually is not trivial to get that episode. If you go to iTunes, you can't really get it. You have to go to our website or to our mobile app, or two of the best places. Some of the other big platforms also won't gate you in terms of how many episodes you can access. A lot of them will limit you to, like, say, the most recent 25 or 50. So you have to dig a little bit to get that. But folks did that en masse last year, all the way to episode 1. That's got me thinking, those episodes, if they came out so long ago, it might be worth a remastering of those, getting them out there, cleaning them up. Some of those firms that were with us, like Zetco in those first episodes, Dan, they don't even exist anymore. That's how long ago we were doing this show. So, yeah, it might be worth going back and maybe making those a little bit easier for the legion of new folks to access. Maybe having, boot camp remastered, something like that. And maybe just getting those out there for people a little bit easier because, again, clearly there's demand for it, and clearly you want it because you're digging for it. So we will endeavor in this new year, listeners, to make those early episodes for you easier to listen to, both from a audio perspective and also from an accessibility perspective. My pledge to you, listeners. And then, Dan, that brings us to the number 1, the big dog. What is it that could beat out our number 1 all-time episode, the first episode we ever did, a bunch of our chats about GameStop and Theta and everything else? What do you think took the crown, sir?
Oh, my God. It's gotta be, I don't know, what, Bitcoin?
Not a bad guess, but think back to the early part of the year, sir, the madness that was going on then. Because we did a few shows on this, and this was one of our first shows really addressing the madness that was happening last year, which was episode 120. Dan, this came out on January 27th, so a few weeks into the meme phenomenon. It hadn't really even been called that yet. And we did a show called Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Short Squeezes, but we're afraid to ask, Dan, because everyone and their mother was up in arms about short squeezes. Short sellers were the boogeymans of all time. Things like Melvin Capital and Citadel were trending on Twitter. It was a weird time, Dan.
Yeah. Everything you always wanted to know about short squeezes, we're afraid to ask. When you said the beginning of last year, I was thinking you were going to mention the special episode that we did where Uncle Mike stiffed me and still hasn't paid me the bet that he welched on.
That would be from 2020. That was our election night special from 2020. So that would fall outside the the boundaries of this. But that was also a fun one. I'll have to go see where that ranks. I don't know. I haven't pulled that one up because that's the previous year. What's the interest on that now? You got to be up to like $1.03 or something now.
Yeah. I mean, was it $1 or $2? I wanted to bet like $500, but seeing as I was never going to collect it anyway,
let's just call it 1/50,000th of a Bitcoin and leave it there. How about
that? Perfect.
So there you go, listeners. That was your top episode from last year. It was popular when it came out. It remained popular throughout the year. Everyone had thoughts about short squeezes. We addressed them a lot on that episode. Some of the strange moral things that were starting to be applied to short sellers. They were somehow evil and things like that. But that was our top one for the year. Hope you enjoyed that. Clearly from the numbers, I can see you folks like yourselves a little bit of the top episode rundowns. You know what else they like, Dan, is asking questions. So let's get to it. A little bit of the old mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
All right, everybody, welcome to the mail call. We got a bunch of things going on out here. We got a great question of the week right now, listeners. You folks can weigh in right now. Where you think VIX will close for the end of the year? It's kind of our annual little fun contest that we do. We made it fun for you. Only gave you 4 ranges. You can guess very elevated, so north of 25. Elevated, so somewhere between the 20 and 25 range. A frothy, so about 15 to 20, or quiet, which will be sub 15. Of course, if you want to get access and register for the giveaway, the great prizes, you have to reply or DM with a more specific guess. Let's say, I don't know, 1710. I'm not saying that's my guess. I'm just giving you a number, an example of what you could do. And then if you're within our margin of victory, or in this case, probably the closest. On vol views, we like to keep it within a tenth of a point. That may be a little challenging for the year, but we'll see what the prognostications get, and we'll see if someone's reasonably close, we'll make an exception there. But get those questions in, get those replies and DMs and guesses in, so you could win great prizes, just like our buddy Luigi did. He won a great prize the end of last year for being precise with his VIX close guess there. Mr. Dan, do you have any thoughts on where you think VIX will close out next year? North of 25, 20 to 25, or 15 to roughly 1999, or below 15, sir? Or do you have a specific guess you want to share with us?
I'm taking 15 to 1999, and I'll give the Welcher Uncle Mike a chance to double the amount of money he's never going to pay me if he wants to take that bet.
Ooh, interesting. I might be able to make that happen, sir. I'm just saying. Let's put that out there for you. Thursday at noon, you can come and try to collect. Let's go out now. We got some other stuff here, but I want to make sure all of our live folks kick off the new year, some of your live questions as well. By the way, one of our listeners, Age of Delaquarius, I do love that handle, by the way. He says, I think my first Options Insider podcast that I heard was when Options Express bought Optionetics. Wow, you're going back a ways, Age. Yeah, that was a hot one. That one was in the early days of our network. That one really stood out. It was our most popular episode I think we ever did. That was before Option Bootcamp existed and some other stuff. Option Express obviously was kind of like Robinhood is now. They were kind of like the darling of the option space back then, and they were the new hot broker out there, and they were obviously option-centric. A lot of people in the option space liked it, and they really went above and beyond trying to educate people about options and do a good job trying to present a good face forward for options. And they went out and bought a firm called Optionetics, which was widely regarded as one of the shadiest things on the planet. In fact, I remember when I was at the OIC conference that year, down in Texas, I believe, when that news was broken there at the event, and the whole place just went dead silent. Nobody could believe that Options Express would go buy this snake oil huckster thing that was known as Optionetics. That was literally, they sell you that you're going to have a Ferrari and everything else second you start trading options, listeners. So I kind of held one of their founders' feet to the fire. I brought him on the network. I said, why the hell did you do this? And that one got a lot of traction. So I'm glad you reminded me of that. I haven't thought about that episode in quite some time. But yeah, that was an interesting one, I think, to say the least. That was a fun one. Wow. Blast from the past. Speaking of blast, he's got a question here as well. He says, if there is a tender offer for a stock, does that affect the options pricing model with the tender offer acting as a price floor for that stock? Well, the short answer to that is kinda, but it gets a little bit more involved than that. Mr. Dan, you've been through a few acquisitions and tender offers in your day. You're trading an options name, and then a tender offer comes in for the stock. What happens, sir?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of is a great answer. I mean, I guess what I would say is maybe specifically, no, it doesn't affect the options pricing model itself, but it does affect a whole bunch of other things like the implied volatility, like the skew, and potentially the expiration date. So, I mean, the model's, still the exact same math, but the inputs can change pretty drastically. If there's a cash tender offer, and it goes through, because there's a lot of times when these offers end up not going through, whether it's because of antitrust or white knights or just the targets saying no and finding a way to make it not happen. But if it goes through, what's really important to understand is that the way I like to think about it is basically the expiration date changes, right? If these are leaps that expire in 1 year and the deal goes through March 31st, then the options are gone March 31st. You thought there was 365 days, but there's only 90 days to expiration. So it can end up being a really big deal. But, like if I want to nitpick at the semantics of the question, I would say, the math of the model remains intact, but the inputs change.
Yeah, it's always a question whether the tender actually goes through. Right? That's the big if, right? A lot of times the stock will shoot up to somewhere near that level, and then it'll kind of hang out there because there'll be some debating whether it'll happen or not. You might see some interesting options paper come up around that tender price, either below it or above it, because people think it won't go through or it will. Maybe some other adjustments. Someone else may come in and try to outbid them. So depends on how certain that offer is, what kind of flow you see going on around it. But generally, that's kind of how it tends to play out. Dan, this is a fun one. I like when it's fun to kick off the year with some repeat offenders, if you will, as well. This one, once I saw this, it sounds familiar. It comes from Jeff Davis. He says, hey, Mark and Dan, I thought you might like a follow-up story on my questions about new listings on options chains. I should have mentioned that the underlying in the question, because he didn't tell us, I remember this now. He said, was Fluence Energy, which meets all of the requirements. As you recall, Dan, this was the guy who asked about new listings, and you told him only kind of half-jokingly to call the SIBO. You remember that?
Yeah.
He has a follow-up for us. He took your advice.
Good.
He says, I took Dan's advice, and I tried contacting the SIBO. Their website form was broken, so I sent a direct email to marketservices@sibo.com, where I wrote the following, and he gives us his actual email he sent to them. He wrote, Dear SIBO, I am a humble retail trader looking to trade a handful of options contracts on Fluence Energy, ticker symbol FLNC, which IPO'd back in October. I think you will find they easily meet all the requirements for listing an options chain. I would greatly appreciate it if you do. Sincerely, yours, Jeff Davis. He says, not 5 minutes later, I got back a reply. And the reply was that SIBO will start the review process on this class. It could take a minimum of 15 business days. Please look out for new listing notifications, which may include your requested classes. For those that do not qualify for options, look for a separate email. So he says, so unless I hear otherwise, he thinks he should get an options chain for Fluence Energy sometime in January. Meanwhile, tell your listeners if they want an options chain listed on a qualifying underlying, try sending a polite email to marketservices@sibo.com. So there you go, Dan. Someone took your advice, and it seems like it actually worked.
Wow, man. Yeah, back in the day, like that was a pretty normal, fairly regular thing, not everyday thing, but, people would do that. And, now that everything's so corporate and there's so much red tape and everything, I wasn't 100% sure that it would work, but yeah, it's nice to know that we're all still respected market participants, and we're all part of one community, even just the small retail trader. I love that. I love it.
Or as he puts it, a humble retail trader. I like that. That is fun. All right, speaking of blasts in the past, let's go out to this one here as well before we wrap up here. This name sounds familiar. Theodore Domzalski. I believe he used to be our food guy, Dan. He used to send us all those food pictures. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's back for the new year. He says, last week I entered a beer call spread on ticker symbol ARKK. He said it was the 105-110 call spread. He sold it for a credit of $1.05. Much to my surprise, there was a special dividend, changing my strike prices to some ridiculous nonsense like 104.22 and 109.22. My brokerage account is now showing the cost basis at 0, so the position looks negative. Will the cost basis of the original options normalize, or should I just count this to my many, let's just say, mess-ups and close it out if I can? Looks like I can buy the spread back for 40 cents, but that is not what is being reflected in my position. Thank you, guys. Love all the shows. Oh, and the wrestlers. Obviously, he's an Option Block fan as well. Let me see if... he says, this is the guy. He says, let me see if I can find a food pick. Merry Christmas. And then he followed up later, Dan. He said, you might have to settle for a drum picture instead. Have a great New Year. He has a picture of some angry guy drumming. So I think he knows you're a rocker, Dan, so he sent you that. So I'll share that with you so you can see the great image that we have here, Dan.
Cool. All right.
But yeah, in general, it sounds like, Ted, you got caught up in sometimes these weird dividends wreak havoc with the brokerage platform. You don't say where the stock was trading at the time. You just say there was a special dividend, so that could help shine some more light on this when you were pricing it up. But if you sold it for a $1.05 credit, and you can go back in the marketplace right now and buy it back for 40 cents, you're making 65 cents. The spreads are what's real. I don't know what your broker is showing you there. So if you have any questions about this and you can buy it back and make 65 cents on the deal, I would definitely, that's a pretty good return on that spread anyway. Mr. Dan, what are your thoughts on special dividends with call spreads and the fact that his broker is showing him some weird nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, your broker can show you some weird nonsense time to time, but it all ends up being temporary. Like I'll trade credit spreads and such on NDX, and like it'll be the end of the day, and I'll look at it, I'll be like, the bell ring, and I'll look at it, I'll be like, what the? This is not even remotely close to real. But then the next morning, it's fine. If what your broker is showing you has been that way for more than a day, more than overnight, you should call the OCC 888 options and ask them what the WTF, like why would that, because there's probably a mistake. And if you call the OCC at 888 options, you'll be armed with the knowledge, and then you'll be able to call your broker and say, hey man, look, I called the Options Clearing Corporation. They said this is supposed to be this. You're showing it this. What the WTF?
Good advice, Mr. P. You're telling people to call everybody these days. You're like the contact the business guy. I like it. By the way, I sent you a copy of that drumming picture there so you can enjoy it for yourself. I'm not sure who that drummer is. Looks like he's pretty angry, though. You know who that is?
I do not, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes through a lot of snares.
Yeah, he's got some sweet face paint, got an angry beard going. I don't know what band this is, but this guy is... it says Dr. D. That could be a Dr. D photography. I don't know. But maybe that's Dr. D, the drummer. I don't know. But thank you for the sweet drumming pick. I think we prefer food photos, but hey, to each their own. Yeah, Dan's advice is good. If you call OCC, they should be able to help clarify you exactly. Also, if you look up at OCC website, they will have a special circular about the special dividend and what the exact contract adjustments were. And then, yeah, the next step, if you have questions, is to contact your broker, because they're the ones showing you these crazy prices. Why is this thing, if you can buy it back for 40 cents, why are they showing you to this weird zero price thing? And then if it's still not resolved to your satisfaction, I would definitely take it off, because it sounds like you can take it off for a profit. So at the end of the day, it's still a winner. I wouldn't mark it down to what you call your screw-ups. I would say this is still a winner. So any trade you can walk away from with a profit, at the end of the day, not a bad thing. And we certainly walked away from that year last year, listeners, with a lot of fun memories, a lot of fun episodes. Glad to see so many of you enjoyed the year last year. Taking our advice is working out for you. Glad to hear that as well. Keep sending in those questions, those comments. And Age, I like your suggestion about that old episode. I've been thinking for a while about doing like a best of for the network. And if I were to launch something like that, which would probably be good for our 15th anniversary year. That episode with OX, I think there were a double episode, actually. Those episodes would certainly be up there. That was those are great times. Always love to hold people's feet to the fire when something shady is going on out there. And we certainly had a good time with that one. Mr. Dan, before we go, for all of the legion of folks who've joined us here for Options Bootcamp last year and are continuing to do so this year, if they want to check out what you got going on, where should they go? What should they do?
Sure, yeah. Head over to markettaker.com, 2 T's in a row, and we're here for you. I end up talking to a lot of our listeners, and I'd love for you to be the next person. So that's how you find me.
And you see, you take his advice, they'll sometimes respond. SIBO will get back to you. Oh, you heard from Dan. Okay, sure. We'll list that option for you. Why not? Check them out over there. Markettaker.com, 2 T's, or what the cool kids call MTM. If you're listening after the fact on the network, I know a lot of you are, then you already heard the early dose you got of the other half of Education Wednesday, which is, of course, Options Playbook Radio. Brian is on vacation, but he also recorded his top 5 for the year from last year. Some interesting surprises in there as well. So check out that one if you haven't done so already. We're back again tomorrow, of course, with the option block as well as TWIFO This Week in Futures Options Friday, volatility views, and for all of you Secret Club folks, back with Options Oddities. And we kick it all off again next week. Another episode of Options Bootcamp. We'll see you then.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.